Okay, hey everybody, thanks for watching this new video I'm about to put out here. It's a video about something there's already 1,000 videos about. That's the Vostok Amphibia watch. Now, people might say, oh no, not another Vostok Amphibia review. Well, this one might be a little bit different. Um, the reason that I'm doing this watch is that, I didn't realize that there were in fact hundreds of Vostok Amphibia watch reviews until I went to find a question answered about it. And, I've had this watch for a while. And, all the reviews that you see, I mean, there's like a cult. And other people have used that term before. I didn't just coin that myself. There's like a cult of Vostok followers that just swear by this watch. The story goes that in 1967, that the Soviet government, they needed a watch that they could use for their military, a watch that would be uh, suitable for the Navy, suitable for diving to depths of 200 meters. And that they didn't have access. The Soviets during that time kind of isolated from the world. They didn't have the ability to acquire Swiss technology, and so the Soviets commissioned these engineers, this Mikhail Novakova and Vera Delova, to come up with some design that would rival the Swiss dive watches of the time. This is how the story goes. This isn't my story. This is a story that if you watch these YouTube videos, you'll see it over and over and over again. And so these Russian designers came up with this idea where most dive watches of the time, they relied on precise machined tolerance to waterproof their watches, but the Russians weren't able to do that. So they came up with this design of a compression case, which the case back is a separate piece that doesn't torque down, but it sits, and then there's a ring that tightens. That when you tighten this ring, it squeezes this case back onto a special rubber seal. In addition, the crystal is a domed acrylic crystal. It is not a glass crystal. It's made out of a soft material and a plastic acrylic crystal. And the pressures, the atmospheric pressures, as the deeper you go, the more water resistant this watch becomes, in addition to some things about the crown, which I'm going to talk about. Now, that's all those things, that the Russians came up with this, and that, the story continues that, if it was the Swiss that invented this watch would cost thousands of dollars. All very romantic, idea. People would probably like to believe, especially if you own a Vostok. Now, I own a Vostok, and I like the watch, but what the problem is that when I started to delve into that story further, there's scant, if any, evidence that that is actually the truth. Not that the compression case doesn't work, but that the Soviets came up with the idea. And here's why. According to everything you can read and see on YouTube, it was 1967 when these two engineers were tasked with this, monumental task of coming up with a dive watch suitable for the military. 1967. Well, in 1956, which is 11 years earlier, a Swiss watchmaking firm by the name of Irvin Piquerez S.A. patented the compression case concept. Almost identical. The only difference they had is they had a spring in the case back that would, as the pressures increased and the watch compressed, the spring would, have it go down more, so that when you initially tightened it, it wouldn't be at its maximum. So, I'm thinking, the Soviets, like any other nation, they have no qualms about obtaining technology from other countries and modifying it or making it their own. There's no, I wouldn't think there would have been patent concerns with this 1960s Soviet government against the Swiss. I mean, we're talking about the Soviets, during that time period. The other thing about the watch is, the legend about this crown, which is a screw down crown. But I want to show you something. If you unscrew this crown, you'll notice that once once it comes off the stem, you'll notice that it's wobbly. It's not, it's like it's loose. It wiggles. It's like it's not attached. See it? So, the story goes with this thing that, oh, well, the Soviets intentionally made this so that it could withstand a shock, an impact, so that it wouldn't damage the stem. Now, I said to myself, okay, I'm not an engineer, but, I'm a grown man too. I understand the way physics works and certain, no matter whether this thing is attached to the stem or not. If you have this piece of metal sitting on top of the stem, I don't even care if it was loose, and you impacted it, the transference of energy would be the same to the stem as if it was fixed to it. You would still damage the stem from an impact. I mean, does that make sense to anybody else other than me? So I thought, well, okay, so what is this true story with this thing? And you look at the videos and you get all kinds of stories about why it's there. Well, there was one article, though, that I did read, which kind of pointed out that the watch had been issued to Soviet military personnel during the 80s. And, the average age of a soldier in any country's military is, late teens, early 20s. That's the mass. That's the average age of the masses of soldiers. You can imagine soldiers in the battlefield of war being issued a watch. They're not going to be very delicate when it came time to wind the watch or set the watch. The conditions might not be ideal where they're going to sit down and say, oh, let me take the care to make sure I'm winding this carefully, precisely. So the wobbly crown, if you think about it, the wobbly crown, when you're winding it, it could mitigate some clumsiness and the effect of some clumsiness on winding it. If you think about different angles where you might be holding the watch to wind it, the wobbly crown might actually mitigate some wear and tear on the stem, damage to the stem in that way. So I'll give them that. Maybe that's it. As far as the compression case, yeah, that makes a lot of sense to me. It's built right like that, and there are other compressor cases that go for lots of money from other designers from various countries, the Germans and the Swiss, and what have you. I think even the Japanese have one. But as far as the Russians inventing it, I don't see any evidence of it, like I said. So that part of the story might just be myth. I don't know. The crystal case, the acrylic crystal case, the acrylic crystal rather. Here's my feelings on that. I thought, well, if the acrylic crystal was such a great idea, why isn't it in other dive watches? Well, find out it is actually in other dive watches. There are a lot of big name dive companies that do make acrylic crystals, and I would imagine that acrylic, being a soft material, even though it'd be much more susceptible to being scratched and marred, that an impact on a sapphire crystal, let's say, it was more likely to shatter it. You have a $10,000 dive watch with a glass crystal. You're whether you're diving or working in your garage, you bang it on something hard enough by accident, or you drop it, you might crack that crystal. How many people drop? I've cracked watch crystals in cell phone glass before, by dropping it. This thing, I'd imagine that you could drop this thing off of a roof and have it land precisely on a rock, and you might mar up that plastic crystal, but it's probably not going to crack. So I have to give it kudos for that. I've also found that any scratches that I do get on this, I'm able to easily buff out with just some regular toothpaste on a moist rag in circular motions. Not the gel kind, but the opaque, pasty kind. Just for a few minutes. Rub it on with a rag, rinse it off, the scratches are gone. You don't even have to buy that Polywatch crap. It's the same stuff. I did some modifications to this watch. The Russians, unlike the Swiss, their philosophy and design is elegance and, artistry. And the Russians, especially, back in that era, were more utilitarian in design, which that appeals to me, It appeals to me. You don't put a watch on your wrist that you're wearing every day, walking around, doing your thing, fishing, hanging out on the boat with your friends, and you got, dress watch on. This watch is more suitable for everyday active wear that you're wearing. So what I did to modify it, because when it first came, it had a highly polished steel. This was all highly polished steel. I thought it made it look not cheap, but it looked inappropriate on this thing. It'd be like putting a mirrored finish on a sledgehammer. What's the point? So I took a piece of Scotch-Brite pad, and I put a brushed stainless finish on it, and I think it looks a lot better. Not only that, but now every time I scratch it, I could take that same piece of Scotch-Brite, this stuff here, not this side, that's Velcro, but this is kind of worn out, but it's a Scotch-Brite, and you just kind of take it and just lightly in the same direction of the grain go over the scratch, and after a couple of minutes it'll disappear. So I've managed to keep this watch looking like it's new when it's actually not. I also put a rubber dive strap on it, made it look more to my taste. It came with a metal band, which I didn't like too much. So yeah, I modified it. It's cheap. It's not a cheap watch. It's an inexpensive watch. I think I paid $70 for it. You put a rubber strap and a dial on there, that you like, because I put this dial on there. The dial that came on it had some dots, which were useless to me. I'm not a scuba diver, but even scuba divers today, they don't use these things. They have equipment that monitors their time during decompression stages and stuff. But this thing is a timer. I use it all the time, You want to get on a treadmill. Right now, I want to step on a treadmill, Look at the time. It's like, it's 1:30, 1:38? To calculate 20 minutes, I could just put this arrow on the minute hand, and then I can know when the 20 minutes is. It's gonna be up there. So I use this timer thing all the time. It's useful to me. I don't care if it goes in both directions. My life doesn't depend on it. So yeah. So I like to watch. Some of the mythical things you hear on YouTube about it. They may not be totally accurate. Maybe the design of the compressor case was something that was, tweaked by the Soviets. They certainly did something maybe unique with the Wobbly Crown. That's interesting. The compressor case, the technology definitely is something seen in more expensive watches, and there are some reviews that people say that this watch has lasted for years. I see one guy, the Wiltshire man, if you want to look at his review, he's had one for 10 years. He's never had it serviced. It's never given him any trouble. And I expect that this one probably will too. It seems solidly built. And if you're thinking about a Vostok Amphibia, I'd recommend it. There's lots of different styles. You can mod it any way you'd like. It's relatively inexpensive, and it does have some horological history and novelty to it that I think is appealing. So that's my review. Leave your comments. I appreciate you watching. Okay, thanks.